This is Macro Analytics, delivering frank conversations on global macroeconomics and market analysis, outside the mainstream, featuring discussions and debates between Gordon T. Long, publisher and editor of GordonTLong.com, and his guests. The content of this discussion is strictly the opinion of the participants. It is in no way a solicitation for business, nor is it to be considered investment advice of any sort. Always consult a registered investment advisor before making any investment decision. These discussions are extremely hard-hitting and terribly frank, and parental discretion is advised. Now, on to the show.
Good morning. I'm Gord Long with GordonTLong.com. As part of our ongoing series on financial repression, I have Jayant Bhandari joining us from Mauritius in the middle of the Indian Ocean off the coast of Africa. Jayant is constantly traveling the world to understand it and to look for investment opportunities, particularly in the natural resource sector. He advises institutional investors about his finds, and he is a senior analyst at Anarcho Capital in Singapore. Welcome, Jayant.
Thanks for having me, Gordon. Pleasure to be with you.
Well, I hope that you're in the middle of the Indian Ocean, so I'm hoping this connection is going to work, but it's an absolute pleasure to have you join us. Jayant, could you possibly give our listeners just a brief overview of your background and your involvement in case they're not familiar with your work?
Well, I do two kinds of things. One is that I travel a lot and I look for investment opportunities, particularly in the junior mining sector, and I advise institutional investors on investing in this sector. I also, as a result of my involvement and given the fact that my clients are invested in these junior mining companies, I also represent on the board of some of these companies, or I financially advise some of these companies. But my real calling is to write on economics and cultures and societies. And I love why development happens in some parts of the world and why the Western world is so rich and increasingly.
Jayant, it's a pleasure to have somebody with as diverse a background as you have, because I think you can bring a lot to offer here. I need to apologize to our listeners if it breaks up because of the satellite we're using. But Jayant, could you give our listeners a view on what you believe financial repression is, and as importantly, what you're seeing around the world in this regard? Well,
so there are two parts of world in my view. One is the Western civilization and one is the non-Western civilization. Western civilization was mostly based on reason and respect for the individual. Now, this has considerably deteriorated over the last few decades. The West is increasingly becoming a police state, particularly the US. But in the West European part of the Western civilization, the regulatory controls are horrendous as well. And all the wealth warfare systems of these economies is degenerating these societies now. Culturally, the West is increasingly on a slippery slope. Now, there is another civilization, which is the non-Western civilization, that has adopted the consumerism and wealth-creating mechanism of the Western civilization. But I'm not sure if they have really adopted these things properly. Democracy has not done very well in these countries. As a result, consumerism is very high, let's say in sub-Saharan Africa, in parts of Asia. And these are making a lot of these countries very unstable. And the only countries that I feel positive about right now is China and some of the smaller countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, Mauritius, where I am today. These countries are doing very well.
Now, why are you in Mauritius? I know you're doing a bit of holiday. Are you looking at natural resources?
I'm actually speaking at Mining and Money conference here.
On the conference on mining, and I know you're talking about in Africa and developments in Africa. Can you make any comments in that regard?
Well, I mean, Africa has been a bad jurisdiction for mining. It's very difficult to make money, make a profit out of investing in Africa. The political risks are so huge. if you make a profit, they steal it from you. If you don't make a profit, they increase your taxes anyway. So Africa in general is a very bad place. And particularly, what is most shameful about Africa is South Africa. This country has the first world infrastructure, but it has continued to deteriorate because a group of junkies have taken over that country.
Now, you're a well-known, recognized natural resources specialist. What are you seeing from a natural resources standpoint around the world? Where are the things that excite you, and where are there things that worry you?
Well, I was saying bad things about the Western societies, but truly the places to invest are countries like Canada or Scandinavia or parts of South America, because you need consistency in political climate. You want stability for people to be able to invest billions of dollars in these countries. So that's where the opportunities are, and I think that's where the opportunities will stay. I also include Australia in that, which is actually becoming, yeah.
No, I was just going to ask you, you missed Australia, and that concerns me because I was just talking to Jordan Alicio in Australia about exactly this subject, but you do include it.
Well, I was very pessimistic about Australia for a very long time. Those people have become too rich too quickly, and that means that a lot of people who did not deserve to be earning so much money started making a lot of money. That meant that the property prices skyrocketed. People bought expensive boats and yachts, and they picked up expensive habits. However, things might be changing in Australia now because their currency has fallen a lot, and people have started to, the economic pressures might improve that country going forward.
Now, commodities around the world have clearly fallen off as it appears that global demand is falling off. How are the miners doing in terms of cost control?
Well, I don't think global demand has fallen. If you look at iron ore, the world is producing 3 times more iron ore. The world requires 3 times more iron ore than it used to consume 10, 15, 20 years back. What has changed is that we have started to supply more of commodities than the demand is there for. Okay. So the problem is with the investors. We have overfunded the mining industry. We should not have ramped up mining as much as what we have done.
Yeah, I see it the same way. To me, things such as quantitative easing and the explosion of cash and bringing down interest rates has brought demand forward, if you were on a global basis, to some degree. But when the demand got forward, supply ramped up in a huge way. Money's cheap, easy to do it, and the emerging markets, to me, exploded. Now the sense is, well, there's just too much supply to match a demand. It's not that it's falling off, it's the rate of growth is slowing. Is that a valid observation?
Well, I mean, look at the rate of growth around the world. It is stagnating. The West European and North American countries are truly stagnating.
Yes. And
this is a result of over-regulating businesses in those countries. Businesses are suffocating in the West now. The economic growth of 1 or 1.5% is pretty much zero growth, really. If you understand the off-balance sheet liabilities these countries have and which continue to increase, both in countries like Brazil, Russia, India, Southeast Asian countries, has started to stick now. And the result is that these guys benefited from low-hanging fruit that came as a result of technological revolution that happened over the last 20 years. The whole of the world was increasing economically over the last decade. Now that the low-hanging fruit have been picked, the economic growth is slowing, particularly everywhere actually, except in the smaller countries and in China.
You mentioned regulatories. to what degree are you seeing those around the world, or in any particular area, suffocating the growth?
Oh, I think it's suffocating growth everywhere in the world, except in smaller countries and in China. And I think that is the reason why US dollar has increased in value, because while US is deteriorating, it is deteriorating slower than the rest of the world. The economic oppression is a fact of the day everywhere in the world. Where growth is happening, a lot of growth is happening because of increasing consumerism. And this is not good for the future, because growth should be happening as a result of increase in supply of products, which means we should be saving more rather than consuming more.
Back to natural resources, we were talking about it regionally, but are there specific areas, specific commodities that you're excited about? Gold, for example, silver, precious metals?
Well, I have never been too bullish about gold, but I'm very bullish about gold. And the reason is that, and I recently wrote 2 big reports on this subject. A lot of people misunderstand why Indians buy gold. The reason Indians and Chinese buy so much gold is because in India, the yield on investment is negative. Now, Western people are getting accustomed to this for the first time. Now, when the yield is negative, it pays to invest in something that gives you zero yield, because at least you're not destroying your wealth that way. So Indians are, in my view, going to increase their consumption of gold. And I think Chinese will keep doing it. And the Western countries, once US dollar has become too overvalued, people will start putting their money in precious metals, for example, gold, particularly.
You mentioned India, and I know you have a lot of background experience there. Can you comment on India and the economy and what you see going forward there?
Well, I'm very pessimistic about India. It is getting worse and worse in many ways. Now, I have to accept that there was a very nice economic growth over the last decade, but that growth, as is happening elsewhere in the world, is now stagnating. Indians have become, it's a very big country, and it should ideally have 40 smaller countries. It is an unsustainable structure, and the country is not doing anything to actually change the society culturally. Now, the concept of reason is almost non-existent in that country. So, and nationalism, the religion, superstitions, irrationality, they rule that country. And I see no changes happening in that country, in those areas. And what has made things very bad is the fact that the current government is a Hindu fanatic government, which is going to make things very difficult for the country, mostly because they are linear thinkers. They can't understand complexities of life, complexities of the society. So I think, and also because industry is not picking up in that country, a lot of youth that are coming into the workforce cannot find jobs. And this is a disastrous cocktail, actually. It will have horrible consequences for India going forward.
Youth not finding jobs is a global problem, almost, certainly. It's noticeably in Europe and more so in North America. Jayant, you mentioned, and you seem quite optimistic about China. Why?
Well, firstly, this is not a democratic country, and I dislike democracies. Democracies are mass rules, and once you accept the concept of democracy, the society starts going downhill. I think Europe and the US started going downhill once they accepted democracies. Now, what is good, what people think a product of democracy is of something else, and that's about the concept of reason, respect for the individual, and these concepts existed in West European societies before they accepted democracy. And that is why some people think that it was democracy that improved the Western societies. Now, having said that, if you look at democracies in Africa and in Asia, they have not done well. Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, China, these countries have done well because they are non-democratic countries for most intents and purposes. So that is why I think I like China, because people are more focused on wealth generation, on improving their lives, rather than about discussing politics, and rather than by trying to control lives of other people using political means.
Which is what democracy was supposed to be about. So it then gets in the way of people's success. You know, part of our search and exploration of financial repression is trying to find investment opportunities for people that will protect them going forward in this world, which means diversification, which means internationalization. Do you have any views on investing internationally and globally?
Well, as I said, I like China. Now, you find a lot of state-owned enterprises in China that are horrible places to keep your money. But remember, you can open a bank account in China. So as a West European or as a North American, I'm not so sure about Americans, but you can walk to a branch in Beijing or Shanghai, open a bank account, and keep some of your money in renminbi. Now remember, renminbi has offered you much better yields and much better appreciation compared to the US dollar. So US dollar has done well, but renminbi has done better than US dollar in the last few years. Investing in property markets is great in these countries. Property companies are doing very well. They're very undervalued in Hong Kong. So I think there are a lot of opportunities. Look for opportunities in smaller countries and in China. Short India, maybe Brazil as well.
Jayant, we're up against our hard line. Great conversation. I apologize if the audio and clarity hasn't been up to our normal levels, but what you have to say is so powerful. Are there any key messages you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Well, we can talk about repression happening around the world, repression happening in North America and Western societies, and this will not stop. This has to play out a whole cycle. And I grew up in India. Repression has been happening in that country for many, many centuries, and I see no light in sight that repression will stop. Once you have lost your moorings to reason and rationality, you are on a downward slippery slope. So I think these big countries, the Western societies, will continue to deteriorate. Look for opportunities in smaller countries. I'm in Mauritius, nice, peaceful place, and people understand that because these are smaller countries, they don't have the concept of a state in their mind. The concept of nationality is not so ingrained, and the result is that they don't waste their money on military industrial complex, and they focus more on wealth creation, but at least they are more tolerant about other people, which is a great thing. Tolerance is a great thing.
You have a very unique perspective, and I hope our listeners really appreciate that. Jayant, can you tell our listeners where they could learn more about you, where they could follow your writings and the work that you do?
Well, I have a website, so that's my name in continuation, jayantbhandari.com. And that's my website, and they can go there and have a look at it. I also run a yearly seminar on philosophy in Vancouver, and the next one is on the 1st of August, 2017. So they can write Google Capitalism Morality, which is the name of my seminar, and they will come across the old recordings and what the next seminar is about.
You have a unique combination of skills, and I compliment you on it. Thank you very much for the time. I very much appreciate it and very much enjoy it, and we'll have to have you back again.
Great. Thank you for having me here, Gordon.
Thank you very much. Talk to you again. Bye.
This has been Gordon T. Long, editor and publisher of GordonTLong.com. New recordings are posted regularly and can be found at GordonTLong.com. New show notifications are available through RSS feed, iTunes, and other social networking venues at GordonTLong.com.